to the Psychohealthology Summit 2018. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Dr. Eva Detko, and my guest for this session is the lovely Dr. Heidi Hanna. As an experienced speaker, Dr. Heidi has been featured at many national and global conferences, including the Fortune magazine Most Powerful Women in Business Summit and ESPN Women's Leadership Summit as well. Dr. Heidi is founder and chief energy officer of Synergy, a consulting company providing brain-based health and performance program for organizations. And she's also the executive director of the American Institute of Stress. Dr. Heidi's publications include the New York Times bestseller, The Sharp Solution, a brain-based approach for optimal performance, Stressaholic, 5 Steps to Transform Your Relationship with Stress, and also Recharge, 5 Shifts to Energize Your Life. So, Dr. Heidi, welcome to the Psychohealthology Summit. It's so great to have you with us. Really excited to talk to you. I've been following your work for a while, so yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thanks for having me here and for that lovely introduction. And I will just let everybody know this is funny. This is how most of my discussions start, with a little bit of stress behind the scenes. So we're dealing with some technology challenges that we just trust are going to work out in our discussion, and we won't even think about that, right?
Right. I think so far, so good. And at least your phone is the right way up now. So that's really cool. I think it's working. So what I wanted to talk about first, you in one of your books, you're writing about stress addiction. And I think that's a really interesting concept to touch on in this interview, because most people, when you suggest that they may be addicted to stress, they'll probably look at you and they'll say, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But yet there are a lot of people out there who are exactly that. They're addicted to stress. So could you actually just explain a little bit about stress addiction and talk about the symptoms, just in case people are, not quite aware that they're doing what they're doing?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So the first thing is that when I mention the concept of stress addiction, there's typically 2 responses. So the first response is, I am so not that person. And people assume that I'm talking about like a drama queen, someone that has to have stress in their life all the time. The other response is, I am so that person. So I think people who get it right away realize that we live in a world that is all about hustle and busyness and being connected 24/7. And the way that I usually find out from somebody is I'll say, if you want to know if you're a stressaholic, just close your eyes and try to relax for a moment. And a lot of times I'm talking to media professionals who just instantly freak out. They start twitching. They feel super uncomfortable just at the thought of not doing something. And so this was really, it's a concept that's been talked about a lot in the research. So I'm not the first one to mention the idea, but I feel like it was confusing to people and they kind of pushed it away. And when I realized that I was struggling with this addiction to needing to be on all the time, and I would plan these vacations and recharge experiences, and I was pretty miserable, to be honest. It was kind of like going through detox. I started looking at it a little bit more closely to understand, what is it about our systems that really begin to crave constant stimulation? And when you look from a neurological perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense that stress and stimulation act on the same reward pathways as sugar, gambling, sex, shopping, all of those other addictions, because we're really trying to imprint memories of stressful situations so that we'll remember, we'll learn from them, we'll grow from them. And those are all really positive things. But just like stress and just like sugar, too much of anything can be harmful for us. So it's not so much that stress is bad, but that unending, unrelenting stress and really losing the ability to relax and recharge is where it becomes problematic. And I would say the majority of people, at least those I know, who are busy and hustling and trying to biohack and kind of override the system are really becoming dependent on stress in order to perform. And we know that long term, that really doesn't work well for us.
Yeah, and actually, in a way, these days, we just tend to overcomplicate our lives. And there's just so much going on. And in this advent of social media and all of those sort of things that people feel that they need to be involved with, because otherwise there is this thing called FOMO, the fear of missing out. If you're not sort of part of that, you're somehow missing out on something. And 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have, obviously, any of that. So definitely, I think, one side of it is that kind of, it comes with the territory as we progress, and technologically, things are sort of getting worse in that respect. But for sure, when people are not well, people with chronic illness, oftentimes when the sort of friends and family recognize that they're not well, that's not always the case, but when they do, they tell the people to take it easy, and so, but that's the thing. A lot of people with chronic illness have a chronic illness because they find it difficult to take it easy, and perhaps that is the very reason why they have a chronic illness in the first place, because for years and years and years, in a lot of cases, it's decades that goes on, and then suddenly they fall off the edge of the cliff. But even when they have the illness, they still find it difficult to take it easy and just switch off and then let the body heal and give the body the space that it needs, right? So can you actually explain a little bit more about that, and why is it so hard for some people to just, to take it easy, basically? Not for everybody, but definitely for some.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, you bring up a really good point about the underlying cause of a lot of chronic disease. And I never want to say that 100% of the time this is the case, because we know there are a lot of different causes and a lot of different kind of manifestations of how disease shows up in our life. But I will definitely say that the nervous system is really at the core of so much of what we experience. And for a lot of people, there are some different circumstances, and you can look from genetic to epigenetic to early life experiences, lifestyle choices, how all of those things play together to affect the nervous system in a way that opens it up to different types of chronic disease, chronic pain, immune dysfunction, gut dysfunction, and we know that all of those things are connected. So I think one thing to think about is how much of a role that chronic stress and stimulation plays in opening us up to these types of situations. And there's some really great research looking at that and the vagus nerve, and how the vagus nerve actually starts to lose its ability to start or activate the parasympathetic relaxation response. So when you have this constant kind of agitation, stimulation, stress, especially early in life, that acute stress actually will enhance immune function and enhance a lot of things about the human system. But over time, it really does start to wear us out. So that's where, just not blaming anybody for this. It's not like, just relax and you're weak because you can't relax, but that the nervous system has adapted to try to help you. And because you've lost your ability to relax, your nerves start to feel like they're always on, always activated, and your immune system can't keep up. And so for someone to just say, you need to relax and heal, it's very, very difficult to do that without actually training yourself to be able to do that. So I think that's one of the main things that I like to teach people is learning, number one, that stress isn't bad for you. It's good for you. Stress is just energy and information trying to get your attention. And stress happens when there's a gap between demand and capacity. So if you're asking too much of yourself, you don't have the capacity, or maybe someone else is asking too much of you, that causes stress, and stress will give you energy to overcome that gap. So that's a good thing when it happens every now and then. When it happens every day, all day, when you wake up feeling like you don't have enough time to get it all done, when you don't have enough finances, when you don't have enough social support, whatever it might be, that chronically is going to change your nervous system functioning, decrease your immune system, and really has this holistic impact. So again, not to blame stress for that, but I have something called my stress mastery formula, which is really to use stress as fuel for positive change. So in this situation, to look into it, I use 3 A's. So it's assess, appreciate, adjust. So to assess how stress has played a role in getting you to where you are right now without judgment, just being able to look at that. And again, there are genetic factors, there's stress sensitivity, which my guess, the majority of people with chronic inflammation, chronic disease, probably have this genetic sensitivity. About 20% of the population has. There's early life experiences, trauma that could be really traumatic, or even just minor traumas like lack of attachment in the family system. There's a lot of these different things that play a role. Understanding that can be super helpful to also alleviating some of that pressure you feel that you should be able to fix this and you should just get over it and you should just relax. It's easier said than done. So once you understand it by assessing your situation and then appreciate that all of this is just trying to get your attention to make some sort of change, then you can look at making those adjustments that are necessary. And I would say that's where relaxation training comes in, recharge training comes in, where you reprogram your nervous system to operate more effectively now that you have the skill sets and you start to get some of the strategies that will help people to do that.
Yeah, and that is really an excellent point, and that takes a lot of pressure off of people straight away. Because there's nothing worse than having a lot of symptoms and just hearing that, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. You should be able to relax and you should be able to let go and all of those sort of things. And as we know, the harder people try to do it, the worse it usually gets as well, isn't it?
And even just that, I talk a lot about what I call the cure for stress being curiosity. As soon as you look into stress and you start to understand it, it actually starts to alleviate some of the pressure. So when we can look at that as just energy and information that we can use for positive change, it starts to remove some of the anxiety and the depression and the things that happen as a result of stress, and just allow stress to be something that we could use as a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a brilliant point indeed. And what I also wanted to touch on actually is the concept of overwhelm. So could you just for a moment talk about how oftentimes the brain can sort of take us away when we're facing new things or overwhelming or unfamiliar things in our lives, that the brain can actually, try and sort of, protect us from that. And so what that's going to get in the way of, if we are sick, and we're trying to get better, then essentially we have to go through a process of change, and that means forming new habits, etc., etc. Now, if the brain sort of perceives us a little bit too much and, overwhelming, particularly when people are trying to get the diet right and then introduce exercise and meditation, all of those different things that they know that they need to do to get better, that can get a little bit too much. So how can people retrain the brain to make sure that they can actually make those positive changes and keep progressing in their lives and building their health and building all those positive habits and changes without feeling that they're getting stuck because the brain is trying to sort of protect them from the overwhelm?
Right. Well, this is where I think that neuroscience is super helpful at giving us a really nice framework for how to rewire those patterns of thought and behavior both. And so I like to go back to something really basic, and maybe people are aware of this, but for me it was really life-changing. And that is something called the triune brain, and the fact that the brain is really organized in a very specific hierarchy of how we process energy and information from the bottom up. And so we have 3 kind of layers or levels of the brain that start with the base of the brainstem, then move to the midsection, and then the top, and the top front in particular. And so the triune brain refers to this as the lizard brain at the base of the brain, the brainstem, the monkey brain in the middle, which includes the limbic system, the amygdala. This is where a lot of our emotional reactions happen. And then the top part, the human brain, which is where we think more rationally and logically. quickly. And so if you think about that, you could think about it as being sensing, feeling, and then thinking. Recognize that anything that starts to trigger sensations, and this is really our non-conscious processing, anything that triggers sensations can actually hijack the brain away from being able to think logically or even be able to kind of manage our emotions. And so for a lot of people who are dealing with chronic issues like this, especially if you have any sort of sensitivity to sensory information, which I'm guessing a lot of people do, we know 20% of the population, again, has this genetic trait that makes them more sensitive. If you are more sensitive to the energy of other people or to stimulation or feeling overwhelmed and you get activated, that logical part of your brain actually will go offline. And what's interesting is the research shows that over time, if you're dealing with stress and anxiety in the primal parts of the brain, that's where the brain will actually begin to kind of atrophy from a functional perspective in the human part of the brain. So if you think about the overactive monkey mind actually begins to cause the human part of the brain to go offline, then it makes sense that what we need to do to reverse that or act more like a human is to start from the bottom up. So a lot of the training that I recommend in Stress Mastery is to first begin with your senses, calming the system, calming the nervous system. And that typically is through breathing exercises, very simple breathing exercises, movement, other things like aromatherapy, weighted blankets, anything that kind of gives your body a sense of calm. Then you move to that emotional center and feel some sort of positive emotion. This is where specific types of meditation can be helpful, relaxation training, visualization, thinking about something that you're grateful for. It's the one I always go back to because it's so easy and so effective. When you start to think about something or someone you appreciate, that then brings that middle part of the brain back online. So now you can consciously say, this is my goal, this is my focus, and your attention is going to be ready to take on some of those changes. But if you are in a disruptive state of being, just kind of energetically, you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed or frantic or anxious or depressed or any of those states, then any change is going to feel overwhelming because any change is perceived by the brain, especially the primal part of the brain, as stress and something that should be avoided. It's what pulls us back to automatic pilot so many times. So I think this is a really conscious, everyday type of what I call brain recharge practice that we need to do. My suggestion is that every morning we start with prime time, where we actually prime the brain to be in a state to be able to make some of these changes. So we don't wake up thinking about the diet we're going to have to be on and all the foods we're going to miss out on. We don't wake up thinking about dragging our butt to the gym or, all the other things. Even meditation sometimes feels like work. But we wake up and we spend a little time focusing on our breath, feeling gratitude, feeling positive emotion, and then moving up to that next level by saying, why is this important to me? What really matters to me? How do I want to show up in my life today? And what that does is primes the brain now to see change as an opportunity instead of feeling like it's a threat. And I want to say again how critical it is that this recharge practice becomes part of your everyday routine, because if you do it in the morning, then you can spend 3 to 5 minutes every now and then throughout the day just quickly going back to that practice. I'm going to breathe, I'm going to feel, and then I'm going to focus. I call it BFF, breathe, feel, focus. You're recharging the brain from the bottom up, and now change isn't so scary. And I can tell you, even though I teach this, I study this, I've been doing this for a long time, there are times, this time in my life happens to be one of those, where I have to really go back and make sure I'm being very dedicated to this practice, or else it's so easy to spread ourselves too thin. And when we know how that affects our body and anything that we're fighting off from kind of a disease perspective, or even just wanting to live our lives more fully and more connected with other people, this really is a fundamental practice of getting our brain into a state where it's going to work for us. I say make your brain your friend instead of your frenemy, because it does feel like it's fighting us a lot of times.
That's really well explained. Yeah, thank you for that. So So we obviously mentioned a few very sort of practical, hands-on type things, not complicated things that anybody can get on board with and do. The key, of course, as we emphasize, and many speakers and myself will always say, that really is the consistency that essentially is what's going to do it. So doing it once every couple of months is not going to do it. It is the consistency, and so that in itself is a positive habit that people have to develop, funnily enough. But it is definitely worthwhile. And you also you've developed the SHARP solution approach as well. So is what you just talked about part of the SHARP solution approach? Could you actually tell us more about the SHARP solution approach specifically?
Sure. So the books that I've written and the programs that I teach really have followed kind of my own evolution, as I think it does for all of us probably. So I wrote the SHARP solution based on a program that I was teaching to a lot of corporate groups, and I actually traveled and spoke and delivered a program called BrainWorks for about 10 years, which is still in existence. I'm not teaching it, but we did a train the trainer, so it's out there. It was designed specifically for financial advisors and entrepreneurs and executives, and really came out of my own wanting to understand the brain better. So I had worked for, at that point, almost 10 years for a company called the Human Performance Institute. And I was teaching exercise physiology, nutrition, and performance psychology to a lot of different corporate groups and traveling around the world. And it was very exciting, but I was exhausted and I was burning out and breaking down really bad. And at the same time, my third grandparent was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And so I started really getting into neuroscience. And what I discovered was just, I guess, a simplistic way to try to help people with applied neuroplasticity, which is the fact that we know that the brain is very adaptable when given the right training stimulation and also given the right recovery, very similar to the body. And so as a personal trainer and nutritionist at the time and psychologist, it made sense to me to kind of use this formula very similar to what we talk about with physical fitness for brain health and fitness. So the SHARP solution was really about the 5 key elements of brain health, and then combining those with the 3 core capacities of brain fitness, just like we were to train the body. And so just to run through those quickly, because they'll be very familiar to the other concepts that we're talking about, those core fundamental brain health components being nutrition, physical activity, sleep, stress management, and social connections. We also now know, I've added a couple more, so it's become the Magnificent 7 ever since, that cognitive stimulation, meaning learning and curiosity and just challenging ourselves, is also really a fundamental brain health component, as well as meaning and purpose. So those are the types of things that we really teach in this holistic way, that those are the elements that are going to give your brain essentially the resources, the nutrients that the brain needs to be able to adapt effectively before you do any sort of training. Because one of the things I found is everybody would want to do crossword puzzles or Sudoku or, brain games, but the structure of the brain wasn't in shape enough to use that stimulation to actually adapt. And that's really important. Just like you wouldn't go to the gym and train your muscles if you had, a tear in the muscle or an injury. And certainly we know that what you eat is very important to how your muscles are going to be able to rebuild from that process. So those are kind of the fundamental brain health components. And then from a brain fitness perspective, I, again, thought about it just like physical fitness, looking at strength, flexibility, and endurance. We know those are the 3 core capacities of physical fitness, and the brain's really the same. We want to have a strong brain where we can really focus and pay attention in the moment, something that most people really struggle with because we are so distracted all the time. We also want to be flexible and creative in the moment, which helps us to adapt, helps us to be innovative, helps us to see patterns weakens in new ways. And that's very different from strength. And of course, we want both of those. So we want to be able to kind of oscillate between those capacities. And then endurance being our longevity and sustainable energy over time. And I'll add to that what's really fascinating to me, I'm actually working with a cohort of scientists out of Harvard looking at kind of optimizing the integration of all of these different capacities. And one of our collaborators, who I'm just such a huge fan of, actually discovered the first Alzheimer's gene and has been able to recreate brain cells in a petri dish where we can now look at different medications that may be effective for reducing Alzheimer's. And what we're now finding is that there are some new technologies, very exciting, hopefully that will be out in the next few years, that will actually give us a screen or a scan of our brain and show us the plaque formation well before we actually have symptoms. And that's super exciting for all of us who are concerned about developing Alzheimer's or any sort of brain disease. And we know, to kind of back up and tie all of this together, that a lot of the chronic immune situations, a lot of the chronic anxiety, depression, anything that's going on in our system that causes an imbalance, causes more wear and tear on our system, is also going to do that in the brain. So it is important that we keep an eye on how our brain is working for us. And I think to be able to assess and look into our brains at an earlier stage is going to be super exciting. And I think that's all going to be coming out in the next maybe 5 to 10 years. So.
Yeah, and it is exciting because, of course, Alzheimer's is considered autoimmune, and so potentially, many people listening will have either concerns over that potentially in the future for themselves, or will be interested to hear about any new developments from the family members and people that know point of view, because actually everywhere you turn these days there's somebody with Alzheimer's somewhere. Most people will probably know somebody these days who's been affected, and of course it's a seriously destructive illness. So that is definitely something super exciting to look forward to. Yeah. So I wanted to actually also ask you, because you often, you actually sign in your email, there's what you say, energy is your most valuable resource, invest wisely. I don't know whether I got it exactly right, but talking about the energy from the brain point of view, obviously, as we already said, most people with chronic illness are where they are because they spend years in constant overdrive. So can you actually just talk a little bit more about what happens in the energy depleted brain and how we can re-energize? And I know some of those techniques and methods we've already sort of mentioned, but if you can give your top tips on re-energizing and recharging, that'll be great.
So the first thing I'll say, and an analogy I like to use a lot, and I think is in most of my books, is to think about the brain as being like the CFO of an organization, so like the financial officer, and your brain is always scanning the environment to see how many resources you have. Whereas I think of the heart as being like the CEO, the chief executive officer, that's focused on what you want. And so many times the brain and the heart are not aligned with each other. The brain is really saying, look, I know you want to be healthier and happier, and you want to be more connected to the present moment. But if you don't eat every 3 to 4 hours, if you're not getting adequate sleep, if you're not moving your body every hour, if you're not taking a moment to relax and turn on that parasympathetic reaction, I mean, these are the types of things where the brain is just kind of going, I don't care what you want. If you're not doing these things to give me what I need, you don't have the energy to spend. So budgets are cut, right? Metabolism shuts down, immune function goes down. So I think it's really helpful to be thinking about that and thinking, how do we treat our brain better? How do we give it what it really needs? And really, those go back to those core principles I talked about before. But to make it really easy for people, this is what I suggest. I suggest that you do a very quick energy audit with yourself. I talk about this in my book, Recharge, and I think I even have a video online about this. But ultimately, if you were to just draw a timeline of your typical day, I would encourage you to think about 5 different times during the day and how you're recharging your energy to see how well you're giving the right signals to your brain. So the first thing is, if you look at what time you go to sleep at night and what time you wake up in the morning. Is it when I go to sleep? Is it staying asleep? What if I wake up? Is it when I get out of bed? I don't really care. All I really want you to do is give yourself kind of an estimate. And the first question is, are you giving yourself adequate time to sleep? Are you getting 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep? And most people are not. And I realize there's a lot of factors for that. And if you are dealing with stress, if you're dealing with illness, it's hard to sleep. You've got a lot on your mind. So for now, just take note of that for you, if that's the case, you're not getting 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep. The number one thing you can do is to create some healthy habits around your sleep patterns. And some of the critical ones are, disconnecting from technology at least an hour before bed, doing some meditation or relaxation practice. I have a great reflection meditation that people can use that's on YouTube. So really training yourself to kind of quiet down the noise from the day and get that restful sleep is super important. I would say that's the most important. The second thing is, what do you do first thing in the morning when you get up? So regardless of what time you wake up, what's the first thing you think about? And are you feeding your brain information that's going to shift you into a positive mindset? Most people, when they first wake up, the thought they have is that they don't have enough time to get it all done, or they don't have enough resources, or they're not feeling well. I deal with this all the time. My automatic wake up is panic, usually. And I will admit that because the patterns of my life over time, my stress sensitivity, and all that I've dealt with my anxiety condition, lead me to most days wake up in a sense of panic until I intentionally shift that by having a morning ritual. And I use the brain recharge practice every morning of breathing, feeling, and focusing. And a lot of times I'll actually use a guided meditation, or I'll use a technique like heart math to do some heart rate variability training. There are so many different methods out there that I won't get into too much specifics, but have something. So what do you do before you go to bed? What do you do first thing when you wake up in the morning? And are you priming your brain to know that it has the energy and to have a better mindset and to kind of prepare yourself for that? And then the other 3 things, how are you eating? Are you eating about every 3 to 4 hours? Are you eating foods that are giving your brain nutrients that it needs, like healthy fats, omega-3 fatty acids? Are you getting lean proteins, lots of antioxidants through fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds? I mean, this is not rocket science, really. Are you feeding yourself consistently enough that your brain thinks it has what it needs? Are you moving at least every hour? Are you getting up, stretching, doing just some gentle stretching, gentle yoga? If you can get some intentional exercise, that's wonderful. People dealing with anxiety, the recommendation is at least 45 minutes a day of exercise. And that's something I practice, usually 45 to an hour, not so much for my body as for my brain. And thankfully, it works both ways, right? It helps the whole system. And then the last thing, number 5, is taking breaks. And it's so, so important to build in breaks and be consistent. So if you look at that over the course of the day, you're looking at the bookends. How do you fall asleep? How do you wake up? Are you priming your brain to be in an optimal state? And then how do you oscillate through nutrition, movement, and relaxation patterns? And of course, there's more complex strategies that we could get into that could really optimize that, things like neurofeedback, and I love massage. But if you don't have the core oscillation energy patterns, then all of those other things aren't really going to have the impact that they could. So I consider those kind of those core practices that are really important.
And we actually, interestingly, we always, in those events that we're doing, we always talk about getting the foundations right. So it's almost that's what you're saying. You need to, with the oscillations, you need to get the basics right, and then you can build in some maybe more advanced strategies into that as well. But as you said, the basics, again, are not rocket science. Most people know that those are the things they should be doing and they need to be doing in order to not just get the brain healthy and energized, but the whole body and the whole system. But are we doing it? Because in the end, it is action that counts. And I've said that a million times, that only action changes things. And so if we know about it and not doing it, it's not actually going to do anything, is it? So that's really, but that's really a helpful summary there. And also thank you for actually sharing how that served you and is helping you. It's nice to know that these are the things that you sort of apply in your everyday life and you yourself find beneficial.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say it came out of just a deep need to figure out what was going to work. Growing up feeling like my brain was broken. I actually have a condition called vasovagal syndrome. So I would faint for what seemed like no reason, but it really was an anxiety condition. Was undiagnosed until I was in my 40s. So it was very confusing for me. I tried to figure out what was going on and now absolutely feel on a mission to share with other people. And I think like most of us in this field, when we have that strong of an understanding of what it's like when it's not working, we can really have compassion and empathy for those who are going through those challenges. So I would say that is a good way to wrap up the importance of social connection with each other, the importance of feeling like we're not alone. Studies have shown that feeling isolated is worse for your health than smoking cigarettes. It causes inflammation. And it's so important that in today's day and age, with all of this constant connection through technology, that we're also prioritizing spending time with people and sharing energy with people.
Interestingly, we had an entire session dedicated to social connection last year in this event because it's so key. And oftentimes the connecting with people on social media is not really real. It's not a real connection. It's not a true connection. And of course, it is about the meaning for each and every individual. If somebody feels that their connection is meaningful, then who am I to say that it is not? But oftentimes those connections can be a little bit fake. And what we're talking about here is the old-fashioned face-to-face human contact, isn't it? Because nothing can beat that, really. So that's a great one to emphasize once again, because it's such a fundamental element of health and healing. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming on to this event and contributing and sharing everything that you have. And we had a bit of a technological challenge here, but I think we plowed through quite well, and in the end, wonderful content from you and fantastic information, lots of great tips. Just very quickly wanted to ask you if there's anything at all that you wanted to share with people with regards your current projects and what's the latest for you. Is there anything at all that you still wanted to add?
Well, one thing I just wanted to offer to everyone is I do have a free Stress 360 assessment, and it's just a nice way to kind of start to assess your current relationship with stress. You can get it at mystress360.com, and it gives some different tips depending on your score. We're also building out a really nice integrative Stress 360 with a full report on things like stress sensitivity, and I have some of those assessments as well that people can find on my website. So the main thing for me right now, working with the American Institute of Stress, is just coming up with this integrative, validated assessment that will really help people to more deeply understand their personal relationship with stress. So that's very exciting. And the Stress Mastery course that goes along with that will actually be coming out very soon as well. So people can check out my website for information and details on that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you yet again. It's just been wonderful connecting with you. Wonderful to talk to you. Thank you, Dr. Heidi. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed